From a discreet table, CEO Lee Jin-woo, disguised in a simple suit, observed every detail. He didn't see a clumsy dishwasher, but a woman of unbreakable strength, whose eyes, even tear-filled, shone with a resilience that deeply moved him. He saw the way she bowed, not out of weakness, but out of an innate respect that society seemed to have forgotten. And in that moment, Lee Jin-woo knew there was something more to this woman than met the eye. He didn't know what it was, but he felt he needed to find out. In that instant, the world seemed to freeze for Lee Sang-wook. It wasn't just the brutality of the scene that had shocked him, but the dignified quietness with which the cook endured it. He didn't see a defeated woman, but a soul forged in adversity, whose eyes, even tear-filled, shone with a resilience that deeply moved him. He saw the way she bowed, not out of weakness, but out of an innate respect that society seemed to have forgotten, a respect for her own dignity, even when trampled upon. And in that moment, Lee Sang-wook knew there was something more to this woman than met the eye. He didn't know what it was, but he felt he needed to find out, and that this discovery could change much more than just her life. As the wealthy customer walked away, leaving behind a trail of scorn and scattered food, the cook, whose name was Hye-jin, remained motionless for a long second. The smell of crushed kimchi and trampled rice mingled with the aroma of the rain that had begun to fall, washing the streets, but not the stain on her soul. She felt the gaze of the few curious onlookers who still watched, shame burning on her face, hotter than the steam from her stove. But what pained her most was not the public humiliation, but the image of her daughter waiting for her at home, perhaps hungry. Every grain of rice on the ground was one less meal, one less day of hope. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, Hye-jin knelt. There was no time for lament. There was only the work of cleaning up the mess, of trying to save what she could, of rebuilding the dignity that had been shattered into pieces. Her fingers, calloused by fire and knife, trembled slightly as she began to gather the remnants, the fine rain now mixing with her silent tears. She didn't cry for the lost food, but for the injustice, for the vulnerability of her existence, for the constant battle to simply survive. From his discreet table, Lee Sang-wook observed every movement. He noticed the absence of anger, the silent resignation, the quiet strength with which she faced adversity. It wasn't the attitude of someone who surrenders, but of someone who knows that life is an endless series of challenges. He had tasted her food, a simple dish, yet made with a passion and flavor that surpassed many Michelin-starred restaurants. And now he saw the woman behind the food, a woman of unshakable character. He stood up, his decision firm. It wasn't an impulse of charity, but a conviction. He needed that kind of spirit on his team, in his company. The Lee Hotel Group needed more than talented chefs. It needed souls who would infuse passion and authenticity into every dish, every experience. And Hye-jin, with her humility and quiet strength, seemed to be the embodiment of that. Sang-wook walked towards her, his steps firm, but his voice, when he finally spoke, was soft, almost a whisper, so as not to startle her. "Excuse me," he said, his shadow falling over her. Hye-jin abruptly raised her head, her eyes wide with surprise. She expected more looks of pity or scorn, not a calm, respectful voice. The man in front of her, though simply dressed, emanated an aura of authority and seriousness. "I saw what happened," Sang-wook continued, his voice maintaining a neutral tone, without pity. "And I tasted your food. It's exceptional." Hye-jin blinked, unsure how to react. Compliments were rare in her life, especially after such humiliation. She felt a blush rise to her face, a mix of shame and a hint of pride. "Thank you, sir," she murmured, looking back down at the wet ground. "No, I thank you," he said, his voice now more direct. "I am Lee Sang-wook, and I would like to make you a proposal. Hyjin finally faced him, incredulity etched on her face. A proposal? From a man like him? Her heart began to beat faster. A proposal? I don't understand, sir. Sang-wook extended a business card, which she took with hesitant fingers. The name Lee Sang-wook and the elegant logo of the Lee Hotel Group shone under the faint lamplight. Her eyes widened. The Lee Hotel Group was an empire, synonymous with luxury and excellence. I am looking for a new executive chef for my hotel group, he explained, observing her reaction, the shock and confusion in her eyes. I saw your passion, your resilience, and above all, the authentic flavor and soul you put into your food. I believe you have what it takes to lead our kitchens. The words fell upon Hyejin like a lightning bolt. Executive chef? She, a street vendor cook, humiliated moments before, being invited to lead the kitchens of a luxury hotel chain? It was absurd, a cruel joke, or perhaps a feverish dream induced by exhaustion and rain. She looked at the card in her hand, then at Sang-wook's serious face, searching for any sign of mockery. But there was none, only an unshakable determination. Sir, I'm just a street cook, she managed to say, her voice choked. I don't have experience in luxury hotels. I can barely keep my cart running. And that's exactly why I want you, Sang-wook replied, a slight smile appearing on his lips. Your experience is real life, raw passion, the ability to turn little into something extraordinary. Our hotels need that. I need that. He paused, letting his words sink in. Think about it. Come to my office tomorrow morning. The address is on the card. There's no commitment, just a conversation. But I believe you have nothing to lose and a world to gain. He turned to leave, but stopped and looked at her one last time. And please don't worry about the cleanup. I'll arrange for everything to be taken care of. Hyejin stood there, the crumpled business card in her hand, the smell of trampled food still in the air, but now mixed with the intoxicating aroma of an unimaginable possibility. The world she knew, a world of struggle and deprivation, had just been shaken to its foundations. The tension in her body was palpable, a mix of fear, hope, and overwhelming dizziness. What would happen now? Would she, a street cook, be capable of taking such a big leap? And most importantly, would she have the courage to try? The image of her daughter, with her bright, hungry eyes, flashed in her mind, and with it, a new and powerful determination. The business card, wet from the rain and crumpled in her trembling hand, seemed like a portal to a parallel universe, one Hyejin had never dared to dream of. The smell of trampled kimchi and the coldness of the wet asphalt still anchored her to her brutal reality, but Lee Sang-wook's words echoed in her mind like a distant bell, a call to something impossible. Executive chef. Her? The woman who could barely keep her street cart running, who lived at the mercy of the weather and the occasional benevolence of customers. It was a bad joke, a delusion brought on by shock and exhaustion. She slowly stood up, her muscles aching, her body heavy. The world around her seemed to have become a blur. The few curious onlookers had already dispersed, taking their looks of pity and judgment with them. The rain continued to fall, washing the street, but not the stain on her soul. With a deep sigh, Hyejin picked up her tarp and began to cover what little remained of her stock, her movements mechanical, her mind in a whirlwind. The image of her daughter, Mireille, with her big, curious eyes, flashed in her mind. Mireille, who dreamed of a room of her own, of toys Hyejin couldn't afford, of meals that weren't just rice and kimchi. Every sacrifice, every humiliation, every drop of sweat was for Mireille. And now, this proposal. A monumental risk, yes, but also a chance. The only chance she had ever truly had to change her daughter's destiny. That night, sleep didn't come. Hyejin lay on her thin mattress, Sang-wook's card on her chest, feeling the elegant logo of the Lee Hotel Group against her skin. Every fiber of her being screamed, "Impossible, madness, you're not good enough." The voice of doubt was a deafening chorus, echoing the words of the wealthy customer, the laughter of those who scorned her. She, a street cook, without formal training, without the polish of haute cuisine, how could she even think of competing with chefs who had studied at the best schools, who had worked in Michelin-starred restaurants? But then, another voice, softer yet stubborn, began to make itself heard. The voice of resilience, forged in years of struggle, the voice of the passion she put into every dish, even the simplest ones. Mi-rae's voice, who deserved more. If she didn't try, if she didn't take a step, even if it was to fall, she would never know. And the idea of not trying, of surrendering before even fighting, was more terrifying than any failure. At dawn, the decision was made. It wasn't an easy decision, nor was it free of fear, but it was a decision. She would go. Not for herself, but for Mi-rae. For a future that seemed as distant as the stars, but which suddenly seemed within her grasp. The morning sun revealed the business card in her hand, now dry and slightly crumpled, but still a beacon. The address was in Gangnam, Seoul's most opulent district, a place Hyejin only knew by glimpse, through the fogged windows of crowded buses. She chose her best outfit, a simple, clean ensemble, but one that seemed lamentably inadequate for what awaited her. Her shoes, though clean, showed the wear of countless miles of hard work. The bus ride was a silent torture. Each stop took her deeper into a world that wasn't hers. The buildings grew taller, brighter, the people better dressed, their cars more luxurious. Hyejin felt the curious stares upon her, the simply dressed woman amidst the ostentation, and shame began to tighten her chest. But she clung to Mi-rae's image, to the promise of a better future. Lie. The bus stopped in front of an imposing skyscraper, of glass and steel that seemed to touch the sky. The logo of the Lee Hotel Group, the same as on the card, shone discreetly above the main entrance. Hyejin swallowed hard. The building was a fortress of luxury, a monument to wealth and power, and she felt like an ant about to invade a castle. Her feet hesitated on the sidewalk. The lobby's air conditioning, which could be felt even from outside, seemed to promise a world of comfort and sophistication she had never experienced. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her wildly beating heart. Her fingers tightened around Sang-wook's card, the only proof she had any reason to be there. With her head held high, despite the fear gnawing at her from within, Hyejin crossed the hotel's threshold. The lobby was a spectacle of polished marble, crystal chandeliers, and lush floral arrangements. The silence was broken only by the discreet murmur of conversations and the soft clinking of cutlery in an elegant cafe. She felt completely out of place, a smudge of simplicity in a painting of opulence. The impeccably dressed receptionist, with a professional smile, watched her approach. Hyejin felt the weight of that gaze, the silent judgment she knew so well. But this time, she didn't flinch. She had come this far. There was no turning back. With a voice a little firmer than she expected, she addressed the receptionist. "I have an appointment with CEO Lee Sang-wook." The tension was almost unbearable, the future of her life and her daughter's hanging by an invisible thread. The receptionist, with her polished smile and eyes that seemed to assess every fiber of Hyejin's fabric, paused before responding. It was a look Hyejin knew well, a mix of surprise and veiled disdain, as if she had come to the wrong place. The lobby's air conditioning, which had once seemed a promise of comfort, now sent a chill down her spine. She clutched Sang-wook's card in her hand, the only proof she wasn't an intruder. "Lee Sang-wook, CEO?" the receptionist asked, her voice a tone louder than necessary, as if to ensure everyone in the lobby could hear the audacity of this woman. "Do you have an appointment?" Yejin felt a blush rise to her face. The humiliation of the previous night was still fresh, and the feeling of being judged again in such a different environment was almost unbearable. "Yes, I do," she stammered, her voice betraying the firmness she had tried to project. "He asked me to come." The receptionist raised a delicate eyebrow, typing something on the computer with perfectly manicured nails. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity, each second a hammer pounding in Hyejin's head. She could feel the curious glances of the few guests in the lobby, wondering what a woman like her was doing there. It was the same kind of look she received at her cart, but with an extra layer of disdain. "Lie," the receptionist nodded. "You may go up to the 30th floor. The CEO's assistant will be waiting for you." Her voice still carried a tone of skepticism, but the barrier had been broken. The elevator, with its brushed steel doors and mirrors reflecting her tired image, ascended silently, carrying her away from the ground she knew so well. Each floor that passed was a step to a higher world, further from her reality. Yejin's heart beat like a drum. What was she doing? It was madness. But then the image of Mireille, smiling, her eyes full of hope, filled her mind, and she clung to that image like a shipwreck survivor to a piece of driftwood. On the 30th floor, an elegant and efficient woman awaited her. She led Hyejin down a seemingly endless corridor, lined with abstract artworks and dark wooden doors. The air was perfumed, unlike the smell of smoke and oil that permeated her clothes. Finally, she was led to a waiting room with a panoramic view of the city. Seoul stretched out below her, a carpet of lights and skyscrapers, and somewhere down there, her street cart, her small and humble empire, seemed tiny and insignificant. The wait was brief, but agonizing. Every minute was a battle against doubt, against the voice that told her she didn't belong there. When the door opened and the assistant invited her in, Hyejin felt her legs weaken. Lee Sang-wook stood by a massive window, observing the city. He turned as she entered, and his eyes met hers. There was not the slightest trace of mockery or pity, just the same seriousness and determination she had seen the night before. He was impeccably dressed in a dark suit, the image of sophistication and power. "Ms. Hyejin," he said, his voice calm and controlled, without the receptionist's cold formality. "Thank you for coming." Hyejin bowed hastily, feeling awkward and inadequate. "Thank you for receiving me, sir." He gestured to a chair in front of his polished mahogany desk, which seemed large enough to hold her entire cart. She sat on the edge, her hands clasped in her lap. "I understand this proposal might seem unexpected," Sang-wook began, sitting in his own chair, which looked like a throne. "But I don't make proposals lightly. I've seen what you're capable of, not just with food, but with your resilience." Hyejin didn't know what to say. She just listened, every word of his weighing like lead. "Our hotel group is known for luxury and excellence, but in recent years, I feel we've lost something," he continued, his eyes fixed on hers. "We've lost our soul, our authenticity, the raw passion that transforms simple ingredients into something memorable." He paused, and Hyejin felt he was reading her soul. "Our chefs are technical, they are talented, but many of them come from a world of academies and competitions. They create beautiful dishes, but ones that often don't tell a story. My food. It's not hotel food, sir," Hyejin finally managed to say, her voice almost a whisper. "It's street food. It's simple." A slight smile appeared on Sang-wook's lips. "And that's exactly what I want. I want your simplicity, your passion, your ability to do much with little. I want the story your food tells. I want you to bring that soul to our kitchens. I want you to inspire our chefs to rediscover the joy of cooking, not just the technique." His words were a balm to her wounds, but also an overwhelming weight. Inspire chefs? Her? The idea was absurd. But I have no management experience, sir. I don't know how a hotel kitchen works. I have no degrees. The list of her shortcomings seemed endless. Sang-wook gently interrupted her. I didn't hire you for your degrees, Hee-jin. I hired you for your essence. The management, the structure, the training, all of that we can provide. What we cannot teach is the passion you have, the ability to transform adversity into art. I believe you can lead our kitchens, not just as a chef, but as a mentor, an inspiration. He leaned forward, his expression intense. This is not a charity offer, Hee-jin. It's a business opportunity. I believe you have the potential to revolutionize our gastronomy. And in return, you will have a salary you never imagined, an apartment you won't have to worry about paying for, and the best education for your daughter, a future you deserve. The air in the room seemed to grow denser, a salary she never imagined, an apartment, education for Mireille. The words were like a siren song, promising a paradise she had always thought unattainable. But fear was a monster in her chest, whispering about the abyss that would open if she failed. The weight of responsibility, not just for herself but for Mireille, was almost unbearable. It was a leap in the dark, a leap into the unknown, into a world that would either swallow her whole or elevate her. The tension in her body was palpable. Would she be able to accept such a monumental challenge? Her daughter's future depended on her answer. The air in the room seemed not only denser but also more rarefied, making it difficult for Hee-jin to breathe. Lee Sang-wook's words echoed in her mind, each one a brick in the construction of a future she never dared to dream of. A salary she never imagined, an apartment, education for Mireille. It was a fairy tale, but the reality of her life, the dirt under her nails, the smell of oil ingrained in her clothes, the chronic fatigue in her bones, screamed that it was impossible. Fear was a monster in her chest, whispering about the abyss that would open if she failed. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her simple wasn't the authentic he was looking for, but just too simple? The weight of responsibility, not just for herself, but for Mireille, was almost unbearable. It was a leap in the dark, a leap into the unknown, into a world that would either swallow her whole or elevate her. The tension in her body was palpable. Would she be able to accept such a monumental challenge? Her daughter's future depended on her answer. Her eyes fixed on the city view outside, a sea of lights that seemed to stretch to infinity. Somewhere down there, Mireille would be sleeping, perhaps dreaming of the day she could have a new book or a toy that wasn't second-hand. This image, this innocent hope, was the only thing that kept her from running away. Sang-wook watched her, patient, but with an intensity that showed he didn't expect a frivolous answer. He seemed to read the internal battle raging within her. I understand your hesitation, Hee-jin, he said, his voice breaking the oppressive silence. It's a radical change, but I'm not asking you to be someone you're not. I'm asking you to be the best version of who you already are. He stood up and walked to the window, his back to her, as if to give her space to breathe. Think of everything you've built with so little. Your food isn't just tasty, it's comforting. It has soul. People return to your cart not just for the meal, but for the experience. That's the magic I want in my hotels. He turned again, his eyes fixed on her. And as for your concerns about management or degrees, that's my problem, not yours. We'll have a team to support you, to teach you the technical aspects of a hotel kitchen, what you will bring no one else can. Sir, she began, her voice still a whisper, I've never worked in a place like this. I've never led a team of chefs. I don't know if I can do it. Sang-wook smiled, a small, almost imperceptible smile, but one that conveyed a strange confidence. I don't expect you to know everything at once. I expect you to learn. I expect you to bring your passion, your work ethic, your ability to adapt. And I'll be here to ensure you have all the necessary support. He returned to his desk, picked up a pen and a document. This is a formal proposal. It details the salary, benefits, apartment and provision for Mireille's education. You'll have time to read it and think. There's no commitment, just a conversation. But I believe you have nothing to lose and a world to gain. But there was pressure. The pressure of a lifetime of sacrifices, the pressure of an uncertain future, the pressure of unconditional love for her daughter. She looked at the document in her hands, the fine print seeming to dance before her eyes. It was more than a contract. It was a promise of security, of dignity, of a future where Mireille wouldn't have to worry about the next meal or a roof over her head. The image of Mireille, her bright eyes, her gap-toothed smile, flooded her mind. She remembered that day at school, when the teacher had talked about children's dreams. Mireille had said she wanted to be an artist, but knew that Mommy didn't have money for expensive paints. That thought squeezed Hyejin's heart. She could no longer allow poverty to limit her daughter's dreams. She took a deep breath, smelling the clean, luxurious scent of the office, so different from the smell of smoke and spices that was her home. It was a door that opened to an unknown path, yes, but also to a path of possibilities. She looked at Sang-wook, his expression serious, but with a glimmer of anticipation. I accept, sir, Hyejin said, her voice gaining a firmness that surprised her. It was a small sound, but laden with a determination that came from a deep place within her, a place forged by years of struggle and resilience. Fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but now it was accompanied by a spark of hope, a flame she hadn't felt in a long time. Sang-wook nodded, a slight smile of satisfaction on his lips. Excellent. Hyejin, I expected no less from you. He extended his hand, and Hyejin shook it, feeling the firmness of his grip. It was a handshake of business, of partnership, not of charity. Tomorrow, my assistant, Ms. Kim, will contact you to arrange the details. You'll have time to adapt, to move, and then we'll start working. Prepare yourself, Hyejin. This will be quite a journey. As she left the office, the corridor, once endless, now seemed like a portal. The elevator, which had taken her up, would now take her to a new beginning. The lobby, once a spectacle of opulence that intimidated her, now seemed like a stage for the next phase of her life. The air conditioning, which had once sent a chill down her spine, was now just the fresh air of a new day. Hyejin knew that the path ahead would be arduous, full of challenges and judgments, but for the first time in a long time, she felt she wasn't just surviving, but that she was about to live. She was ready for the leap. She was ready to fight for Mireille, and now for herself, in a world that once seemed unattainable. As she left Lee Sang-wook's office, the Seoul night air had never felt so different. It wasn't just the coolness coming from the building's air conditioning, but a breeze that seemed to carry the scent of an unknown future. Each step in the corridor, each floor the elevator descended, was an echo of her decision, a heartbeat resonating between incredulity and a newfound determination. The lobby, once a spectacle of opulence that intimidated her, now seemed like a stage for the next phase of her life, a portal to a world she had only glimpsed in her most audacious dreams. The journey back home was a blur. The familiar streets, the sounds of the city she knew so well, everything seemed viewed through a veil. The smell of smoke and oil that permeated her clothes, once a part of her identity, now seemed a reminder of a past she was about to leave behind. She sat on the bus, watching the city lights pass, and a single question hammered in her mind. Did I really do this? The answer was a firm yes, but laden with a weight that almost suffocated her. Fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but now it was accompanied by a spark of hope, a flame she hadn't felt in a long time. When she opened the door to her small room, silence enveloped her. Mireille slept soundly in her makeshift bed, an angel with messy hair and an innocent smile on her lips, even in her sleep. Hyejin knelt beside her, gently tracing the outline of her face. How to explain to a child that the world she knew was about to turn upside down, for the better? How to translate the magnitude of that offer, the promise of a worry-free future, into the simplicity of Mirei's mind? It was a burden, but a burden of love, of responsibility, of a chance to give her daughter the life she deserved. The next morning, the sun seemed to shine with a different intensity. The smell of coffee and toast she prepared for Mirei seemed sweeter. Her routine, once an anchor of her existence, was now a prelude to something new. The phone rang, and the polite, professional voice of Ms. Kim, Sang-wook's assistant, filled the small room. "Good morning, Ms. Hyejin. Mr. Lee asked me to contact you to begin the procedures." The efficiency of that world was palpable, almost frightening. Details about the new apartment, the moving process, Mirai's enrollment in the new school. Everything was being orchestrated with a precision Hyejin had never experienced. The visit to the new apartment was a shock to her senses. It was spacious, bright, with windows that opened to a stunning city view. The kitchen, gleaming and equipped with appliances she had only seen in magazines, was a sanctuary, but it was also strange, silent. Without the soul she gave her own home, without the smell of her spices, without the warmth of her gas stove. It was a palace compared to her small room, but it was also an emptiness to be filled, a space she would have to transform into a home. Mirei, with her wide eyes, ran from room to room, her laughter echoing through the empty walls. "Mommy, it's a castle. Can we have a dog here?" Her daughter's innocence was a constant reminder of why she was doing all this. The move was a whirlwind of emotions. Saying goodbye to her food cart, her faithful companion for so many years, was like saying goodbye to a part of herself. It was the symbol of her struggle, her resilience, her art, but it was also the symbol of a life of sacrifices, sleepless nights, and humiliations. As the moving truck carried her few possessions to the new apartment, Hyejin felt a bittersweet mix of relief and nostalgia. The days that followed were filled with orientations, meetings, and the absorption of an overwhelming amount of information. She was introduced to a support team that would help her with the transition, and a training schedule that would prepare her for the environment of a hotel kitchen. The image of the hotel kitchen, with its gleaming equipment and its team of experienced chefs, was a monster that still frightened her. She felt like a fish out of water, a street cook in a world of haute cuisine, with its rules and protocols. Fear was a constant companion, whispering doubts in her mind. What if she wasn't good enough? What if her simplicity was seen as a lack of sophistication? What if she failed, not just for herself, but for Mirei, whose eyes now shone with the promise of a boundless future? But each time fear threatened to engulf her, the image of Mirei, with her expansive dreams, was the shield that protected her, the force that propelled her. She had accepted the challenge. Now she would have to prove to herself and to everyone that the soul of her street food was worthy of a place in the city's most sophisticated kitchens. The journey was just beginning, and the path ahead, she knew, would be arduous, but she was ready to fight. The first ray of sunlight that invaded the new apartment was not the same as what used to peek through the gap in her small room's door. It was brighter, cleaner, reflecting off the polished surfaces and flawless glass. The smell of fresh coffee, which she prepared in the gleaming kitchen, seemed to carry a different weight, a mix of promise and dread. Mirei, already dressed in her new school uniform, skipped through the room, her eyes wide with admiration. "Mommy, the new school has a huge garden, and the teacher said we're going to paint with real paints." Her daughter's innocent joy was a balm for the anxiety gnawing at Hyejin from within. It was for Mirei that she was about to plunge into the unknown. The journey to the Imperial Hotel was a passage through a world that had once been invisible to her. Taxis passed her with elegant indifference. Glass and steel buildings rose like monuments to a reality she only knew from afar. Upon entering the lobby, the air conditioning, which had once sent a chill down her spine, was now merely the prelude to the thermal shock awaiting her in the kitchen. Ms. Kim awaited her, her posture impeccable and her smile professional. "Good morning, Ms. Hai-jin. Ready for your first day?" The question, simple in its phrasing, echoed with the magnitude of an epic challenge. The Imperial Hotel kitchen was a universe unto itself. It was a spectacle of stainless steel, fluorescent lights, and an orchestra of sounds. The sizzle of pans, the precise chop of knives, the murmur of voices in different languages. Chefs in immaculate white uniforms moved with a rehearsed choreography, each at their station, executing tasks with almost surgical precision. Hai-jin, in her newly acquired uniform that still smelled new, felt like an intruder, a dissonant note in a perfectly tuned symphony. The head chef, a tall and imposing man named Chef Kang, greeted her with a formal nod. His eyes, however, were a mix of curiosity and skepticism, sweeping over her from head to toe. "Welcome, Ms. Hai-jin. Mr. Lee has high expectations for you." The phrase, delivered with icy politeness, was a reminder that she wasn't there by her own merit, but by Sang-wook's gamble. The other chefs at their stations cast furtive glances, their whispers muffled by the kitchen noise, but their judgments were almost palpable. The street cook had arrived. Her first day was a torrent of information. She was assigned to observe, to learn the protocols, the hygiene standards, the impeccable organization of each ingredient, the precision of measurements. It was a world of molecular gastronomy, of French and Japanese techniques, of dishes that were miniature works of art. She observed the dexterity with which the chefs handled exotic ingredients, the calm with which they dealt with pressure, the technical language that seemed like a secret dialect. Every movement, every decision was governed by an invisible manual of rules she had never even dreamed existed. The contrast with her food cart was stark. There, she relied on her instinct, her intuition, the passion she put into every simple dish. Here, it was all about control, standardization, replicating perfection. Where was the soul? Where was the improvisation? Where was the freedom to create from the heart? She felt a knot in her throat, a corrosive doubt that threatened to engulf her. What if her art was just naive simplicity in this temple of haute cuisine? In the afternoon, during a brief break, she hid in a corner of the pantry trying to process everything. The smell of fine spices, of truffles and saffron, was intoxicating, but it also made her feel even more out of place. She remembered the smell of smoke and oil from her own stove, Mireille's laughter as she prepared kimchi. That life, so full of difficulties, now seemed a refuge of familiarity and comfort. "Is everything all right, Ms. Hai-jin?" Chef Kang's voice startled her. He was there, standing at the door, arms crossed. "It's a lot of information at once, I know, but the pace here is relentless. There's no time to hesitate." His voice was neutral, but the message was clear. She needed to adapt and fast. The fear, which had been a whisper, was now a scream in her mind. What if she failed? What if all this was a mistake, a fantasy about to crumble? But then the image of Mireille with her bright eyes and her gap-toothed smile flooded her mind. The promise of a worry-free future, the chance for her daughter to have real paints. That image was the shield that protected her, the force that propelled her. She had accepted the challenge. She had promised herself and Mireille that she wouldn't give up. She raised her head, meeting Chef Kang's gaze. "I'm fine, Chef. Just absorbing. I will learn. I will adapt." Her voice, though a little shaky, carried a firmness that surprised her. It was the voice of a woman who had fought her whole life, who had transformed adversities into resilience. The path ahead would be arduous, full of judgments and challenges. But she was ready to fight, not just for Mireille, but now for herself, to prove that the soul of her street food had a place and a value in the city's most sophisticated kitchens. The journey was just beginning, and she knew that every step would be a battle, but she was ready to wield her knives and face the fire. The days that followed her first contact with the Imperial Hotel kitchen were a trial by fire for Hyejin. Each morning began with the same ritual. The smell of coffee in the gleaming kitchen, Mireille's laughter echoing through the spacious apartment, and the familiar knot in her stomach. Her new uniform, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a heavy burden, a disguise she feared would be unmasked at any moment. In the hotel kitchen, the pace was relentless. It was a frantic dance of synchronized movements, where each chef was a vital cog in a perfectly oiled machine. Hyejin, assigned to the prep station, felt like a clumsy ballerina amidst acrobats. She observed the dexterity with which the sous chefs filleted exotic fish, the millimeter-perfect precision with which they cut vegetables into julienne, the calm with which they assembled dishes that looked like miniature works of art. Her own movements, once so confident and intuitive at her food cart, now seemed slow, hesitant, almost amateurish. Chef Kang was a constant shadow. His eyes, which seemed to see everything, hovered over Hyejin with an intensity that made her break out in a cold sweat, even under the powerful air conditioning. He rarely spoke directly to her, preferring to instruct the other chefs aloud, his words laden with veiled criticism that Hyejin felt was directed at her. Precision is the soul of haute cuisine, Chef Park. There is no room for improvisation or for those who do not understand the importance of every millimeter. It was a jab, a constant reminder that her simplicity was a flaw in this new world. The other chefs, for the most part, ignored her. Some cast curious glances, others, frankly, disdainful ones. She was the street cook whom the CEO had inexplicably rescued. The buzz about her arrival, about Sang-wook's gamble, was a constant hum in the kitchen corridors, feeding the insecurity that already gnawed at her. She heard whispers about favoritism and the boss's whims, and every word was a stab at her already fragile self-esteem. One day, Chef Kang tasked her with preparing a beef consommé, a seemingly simple task, but one that demanded impeccable clarity and flavor. "Ms. Hyejin," he said, his voice icy, "a consommé is the ultimate test of patience and technique. There's nowhere to hide." Hyejin, accustomed to robust and flavorful broths, but with a more rustic appearance, struggled to achieve the required crystalline transparency. She tried her techniques, her intuitions, but the broth stubbornly remained cloudy, the fat refusing to separate completely. She felt as if she were fighting against the very nature of the ingredients, forcing them to fit a mold that wasn't hers. With each frustrated attempt, Chef Kang's face grew sterner. "This isn't a street broth, Ms. Hyejin. This is an imperial consommé. Where is the clarity? Where is the perfection?" His words were a whip, and Hyejin felt the humiliation burn in her cheeks. She saw the other chefs casting looks of pity, or worse, satisfaction. It was as if they had been waiting for this, waiting for her to fail, to prove she didn't belong there. That night, back in her silent apartment, the smell of truffles and saffron still permeated her uniform, mixing with the scent of her own frustration. Mireille, oblivious to the storm raging inside her mother, told her about new friends at school, about the garden where she could paint with real paints. Her daughter's innocent joy was a balm, but also an overwhelming pressure. It was for Mireille that she was enduring all this, but what if she wasn't capable? What if she failed and dragged Mireille back into a life of sacrifices? She sat in the gleaming kitchen, looking at the expensive appliances that seemed to mock her ineptitude. Where was the soul of her food? Where was the passion that drove her? Here, everything seemed so cold, so technical, so devoid of the emotion she poured into every dish. She missed the warmth of her gas stove, the noise of the street, the satisfied smiles of her customers. She missed being Hyejin, the street cook, and not this imposter in an immaculate white uniform. Doubt was a monster gnawing at her insides. What if Sang-wook had made a mistake? What if she was just a curiosity, an experiment doomed to fail? The temptation to give up, to return to the familiarity of her previous life, was strong. But then the image of Mireille's face, her eyes shining with the promise of a boundless future, flooded her mind. That face was the shield that protected her, the force that propelled her. She had promised herself and Mireille that she wouldn't give up. The next morning she got up before the sun, even before Mireille. In the apartment kitchen she took a piece of meat and some vegetables, not to cook, but to practice. She began to cut, not with the speed the hotel chefs had, but with meticulous attention to precision. She remembered Chef Kang's words about the importance of every millimeter. She wasn't just cutting, she was learning to see, to feel, to understand the geometry of ingredients. She was translating her intuition into the language of precision. Upon arriving at the hotel, the knot in her stomach was still there, but something had changed. There was a new determination in her eyes, a spark of defiance. She would not be broken. She would not be defeated. She didn't know if she could master haute cuisine, but she knew she wouldn't give up trying. She would wield her knives not just with passion, but with a new pursuit of perfection. The journey was just beginning, and she was ready to face every battle, every criticism, every skeptical glance, until the soul of her street food found its place and its value in the city's most sophisticated kitchens. Days turned into weeks, and the Imperial Hotel kitchen became a battlefield for Hyejin. Each morning, Mireille's ritual of delighting in breakfast and school stories was the only balm before plunging into the hotel's cold perfection. Her white uniform, immaculate and spotless, was a constant reminder of the chasm between who she was and who she needed to become. The morning practice in her apartment kitchen became her anchor. Before the sun rose, while Mireille still slept, Hyejin would take vegetables and meats not to cook, but to deconstruct. She cut carrots into julienne repeatedly until each strip was identical to the last. She filleted imaginary fish, feeling the knife blade slide with a precision that was once alien to her. She wasn't just imitating, she was internalizing the geometry of ingredients, the logic behind each cut, the dance between knife and board. Chef Kang's words about every millimeter echoed in her mind, transforming from criticism into a learning mantra. In the hotel kitchen, the pressure was incessant. Chef Kang, with his upright posture and piercing gaze, continued to be a relentless force. He didn't praise her, but his criticisms became less frequent, more focused. Better, Ms. Hyejin, but still not enough for the Imperial. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible progress, but for Hyejin, it was like a ray of sunlight breaking through the clouds. The other chefs, once openly disdainful, now watched her with a more neutral curiosity, some even with reluctant respect. They saw her practice tirelessly, the last to leave, the first to arrive. The street cook was refusing to be just a joke. One day, Chef Kang tasked her with preparing a hollandaise sauce for a special dish. "Ms. Hyejin," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "this sauce requires patience, precision, and a delicate touch. One mistake, and it breaks. One success, and it elevates the dish." Hyejin felt the familiar knot in her stomach. She knew the theory, but practice was another story. Her intuition, so strong with robust broths and marinades, felt lost in the delicacy of the emulsion. She began, whisking the egg yolks with vinegar, adding the clarified butter drop by drop. Sweat ran down her forehead, not just from the kitchen's heat, but from the intensity of her concentration. She remembered her mother, who had taught her to make kimchi, saying that food felt the intention of the person preparing it. There, she felt the source sensing her hesitation. The mixture began to thicken, but seemed on the verge of separating, of turning into a grainy disaster. Panic began to rise. Then she closed her eyes for an instant. She remembered the rhythm of her own gas stove, the smell of chili and garlic, the sound of Mireille's laughter. She remembered the passion she put into every simple dish, the pursuit of a flavor that nourished not just the body, but the soul. What if she could bring that soul to precision? She opened her eyes. Instead of just mechanically following the recipe, she began to feel the source. She adjusted the bain-marie's temperature with a more intuitive touch, increased the whisk's pace, not by rule, but by an instinct that told her what the emulsion needed. She added a pinch of salt, not the exact measurement from the book, but what her palate, trained by years of tasting and adjusting, dictated. A drop of lemon juice to cut through the richness, a touch that wasn't in the Imperial's standard recipe, but which she knew would elevate the flavor. The sauce, previously trembling, began to stabilize, shining with a silky, velvety consistency. It was rich, yes, but with a lightness and freshness that surprised her. She tasted it, and an almost imperceptible smile appeared on her lips. It wasn't just technically perfect. It had a flavor that was unmistakably hers, a subtle signature amidst standardized perfection. Chef Kang approached, his shadow falling over her. He took a spoon, tasted the sauce, and his eyes narrowed. Hyejin held her breath, awaiting the criticism, the familiar jab. He tasted it again, this time with an expression she had never seen before, a mix of surprise and recognition. "Interesting, Ms. Hyejin," he said, his voice still neutral but with a new inflection. "There's a depth here I didn't expect." He didn't praise her openly, but the silence that followed was more eloquent than any words. The other chefs, watching from afar, exchanged glances. Something had changed. That night, back in the apartment, Mireille told her about a drawing she had made at school, full of vibrant colors. "It's for you, Mommy," she said, holding out the paper. "It's our life, full of colors." Hyejin hugged her daughter, the smell of truffles and saffron on her uniform now mixed with the sweet aroma of victory. She hadn't yet mastered haute cuisine, but she had found a way to infuse her own essence, her soul, into the required precision. She had found a balance. Doubt was still a monster, but now there was a new weapon in her arsenal, the certainty that her passion and intuition were not flaws, but rather secret ingredients, capable of transforming technical perfection into something truly extraordinary. The journey was far from over, and the battles would be many, but Hyejin knew she was no longer fighting just to survive, but to flourish, to prove that the soul of her street food had a place and invaluable worth in the city's most sophisticated kitchens. She was ready to wield her knives, not just with technique, but with the soul that made her unique. Chef Kang's silence, after tasting Hyejin's hollandaise sauce, resonated through the kitchen like a bell. There were no compliments, but neither was there the biting criticism she expected. It was a silent recognition, an almost imperceptible nod that, for Hyejin, was worth more than 1,000 words. The glances of the other chefs, once laden with scorn, now held a mix of surprise and reluctant respect. The street cook was no longer a joke. She was a force to be watched, a presence that refused to be ignored. The days that followed were different. Chef Kang remained demanding, but his instructions were more direct, less laden with irony. He assigned her more complex tasks, observing her with an intensity that once intimidated her, but which she now interpreted as a challenge. Hyejin, in turn, embraced each task with renewed hunger. Her morning practice in her apartment intensified. She didn't just cut and slice, she deconstructed, analyzed, and then rebuilt dishes in her mind, seeking harmony between technical precision and the soul she knew her food possessed. Still, doubt was a persistent shadow. That small triumph with the hollandaise sauce was just one step. The Imperial Hotel was a colossus of excellence, and she felt she was still crawling. The smell of truffles and saffron on her uniform, once a reminder of her frustration, now mingled with the aroma of her own determination. Mireille, oblivious to the complexity of the adult world, continued to be her beacon, her vibrant drawings and school stories the anchor that kept her steady. Then came the announcement that would turn the kitchen upside down. The Imperial Hotel would host a gala dinner for a group of high-profile international investors, led by a renowned food critic known for his ruthless palate and reviews that could make or break a restaurant's reputation. It was the Imperial's golden opportunity to solidify its position as the pinnacle of luxury cuisine in Seoul. And, for Hyejin, it was the ultimate test. Chef Kang called a meeting with the entire executive kitchen team. His voice was grave, his eyes sweeping over each face. "This is no ordinary dinner," he declared. "It's a statement. Every dish must be impeccable, innovative, and tell a story of excellence. I'm assembling a team for the tasting menu. Each of you will be responsible for a key element." Hyejin felt the familiar knot in her stomach, but this time, mixed with a pang of excitement, she was ready for the challenge. To her surprise, Chef Kang assigned her the main course, a premium cut of meat with a complex sauce and accompaniments that were meant to elevate the experience. "Ms. Hyejin," he said, his eyes fixed on hers, "I want you to bring something unexpected. Something that is technically perfect, but also has a signature, your signature." Those words echoed in Hyejin's mind, her signature. That meant she shouldn't just replicate, she should create. The pressure was overwhelming. She found herself back in her apartment, looking at the meat she practiced cutting, but now with a new purpose. How could she infuse the soul of her street food, the simplicity and comfort that defined it, into a dish that needed to be worthy of the Imperial and an international critic? She spent sleepless nights, sketching ideas, experimenting with flavor combinations. She remembered the rich broths her mother made, the secret marinades that transformed simple ingredients into explosions of flavor. What if she could take the essence of a humble dish, a comforting Korean stew, and elevate it with haute cuisine techniques? The idea seemed crazy, almost sacrilegious by imperial standards, but the spark of defiance in her eyes propelled her. She decided her main course would be a filet mignon, but the sauce would be the star. A sauce that would start with a base of a traditional jjigae, but would be clarified, reduced, and infused with exotic herbs and spices, transforming it into a velvety, complex emulsion. The accompaniments would be seasonal vegetables, prepared with molecular precision, but with a touch of flavor that evoked the earth, simplicity. With each attempt, she failed and started over. The sauce separated, the flavors didn't harmonize, the presentation seemed amateurish. Frustration threatened to engulf her. But then she remembered Mireille's face, the promise of a boundless future. She remembered the feeling of being on the street, creating something delicious out of nothing. She wasn't just cooking, she was fighting, proving her worth. On the morning of the gala dinner, the Imperial kitchen was a whirlwind of controlled activity. The air was charged with anticipation and nervousness. Hyejin was at her station, the filet mignon perfectly seared, the vegetables awaiting her final touch. The sauce, her secret creation, simmered gently, releasing an aroma that was both familiar and exotic. Chef Kang approached, his eyes sweeping Hyejin's station. He said nothing, just an almost imperceptible nod. Hyejin took a deep breath. She knew this was the moment. She wasn't just serving a dish, she was serving her soul, her story, her redemption. She wielded her knives not just with technique, but with the passion that made her unique. The journey was far from over, but at this moment, under the watchful eyes of all, Hyejin was ready to prove that the soul of her street food had a place and invaluable worth. In the city's most sophisticated kitchens, the first dish was ready to be served. Hyejin's fate, and perhaps the Imperial's, was on the table. The air in the Imperial kitchen was a symphony of tension and precision. The clinking of cutlery, the whispered orders, the controlled sizzle of pans. Each sound was a raw nerve. Hyejin, with steady hands but a heart beating like a war drum, watched the waiters carry the first dishes to the dining hall. Her perfectly seared filet mignon rested on a bed of sweet potato puree with a hint of ginger, flanked by seasonal mini vegetables, each a work of art in itself. But the true star, she knew, was the sauce. That velvety emulsion, born from the soul of a humble jjigae and elevated by the most refined technique, shimmered over the meat like a promise. In the dining hall, the murmur ceased as the dishes were reverently placed. The soft lights of the crystal chandelier reflected off the polished surfaces, creating a visual spectacle. All eyes, however, converged on the main table, where the renowned food critic Monsieur Dubois awaited. His reputation preceded him, a man of few words, but with an infallible palate, capable of elevating or destroying careers with a single phrase. In the kitchen, Hyejin felt the weight of every dragging second. The silence from the dining hall was more deafening than any noise. She imagined Monsieur Dubois, his expression impassive, evaluating not just the flavor, but the story behind each bite. She remembered the smell of smoke and chili from her street stall, Mireille's laughter. That day, everything changed when humiliation transformed into a chance. This was the story she had tried to infuse into that sophisticated dish. The soul of her street food, the resilience of her life, the hope for her daughter's future. Chef Kang stood beside her, a statue of self-control. His eyes, however, never stopped observing Hyejin, an intensity she couldn't decipher. Was it anticipation, doubt, or a silent recognition of the abyss she was about to cross? Suddenly, one of the waiters returned to the kitchen, his face a mask of contained surprise. He leaned into Chef Kang, whispering something. Hyejin held her breath. Was it a complaint? A disaster? Chef Kang merely nodded, an almost imperceptible movement. Then he turned to Hyejin. Monsieur Dubois? He asked to speak with the chef responsible for the main course. Hyejin's heart leaped. A request to speak with the chef could mean either a resounding compliment or devastating criticism. Panic threatened to overwhelm her, but then she remembered the promise she had made to herself, not just to survive, but to flourish. She had poured her soul into that dish. There was nothing left to do but face the judgment. Chef Kang gestured towards the dining hall door. Go, Ms. Hyejin. It's your turn. With trembling legs, but an upright posture, Hyejin walked out of the kitchen, the smell of truffles and saffron on her uniform now mixing with the aroma of her own destiny. The dining hall seemed even grander, the guests' gazes turning to her. She saw Monsieur Dubois. He was seated, the plate in front of him almost empty. A small smile played on his lips, something Hyejin hadn't expected. She approached the table, bowing respectfully. Monsieur Dubois, I am Hyejin, the chef responsible for the main course. The critic observed her, his penetrating blue eyes sweeping over her from head to toe. He picked up his napkin, wiped his lips with a slow, deliberate movement. The silence was so dense that Hyejin could hear her own heart beating. Miss Hyejin, he began, his voice grave and with a distinct French accent. I have tasted the most exquisite dishes in the world. Impeccable techniques, rare ingredients, stunning presentations. But rarely, very rarely, do I find a dish that tells me a story. Hyejin felt a shiver. A story. That was exactly what she wanted. Your filet mignon is perfectly cooked, the vegetables, an explosion of freshness and texture. But the sauce. Ah, the sauce. He paused dramatically, and Hyejin held her breath again. It is complex, yes, but with a surprising familiarity, a depth that harks back to something ancestral, to a comfort that transcends haute cuisine. There is a soul here, Ms. Hyejin, a soul I did not expect to find in a hotel so imperial. He smiled, a genuine smile this time. It's a dish that speaks of roots, of resilience, of a passion that refuses to be contained by conventions. It's bold, it's innovative, and it is, above all, delicious. The other guests, listening attentively, began to murmur in approval. Some applauded discreetly. Hyejin felt her eyes well up. It was the validation she had sought so desperately, not just of her technique, but of the essence of who she was. "Congratulations, Ms. Hyejin," Monsieur Dubois concluded, extending his hand. "You didn't just elevate a dish. You elevated my expectation of what cuisine can be." Hyejin shook his hand, a mix of relief and triumph flooding her. She had done it. She had proven that the soul of her street food not only had a place, but could shine in the world's most sophisticated kitchens. Upon returning to the kitchen, the tense silence had been replaced by a buzz of excitement. The other chefs looked at her with new respect, some even with admiration. Chef Kang, still in his imposing posture, met her eyes. A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only reaction. But for Hyejin, it was enough. It was confirmation that she had not only passed the test, but redefined the terms. The journey was far from over, but she knew she had found her place, and that her voice, through her food, had finally been heard. The taste of victory was bittersweet, but undeniably delicious. The taste of victory was bittersweet, but undeniably delicious. Hyejin returned to the kitchen, the buzz of excitement growing as she passed. The glances of the other chefs, once of skepticism or veiled rivalry, now carried a new weight, respect, perhaps even admiration. Some nodded, others murmured congratulations. Chef Kang, still in his imposing posture, met her eyes. A small, almost imperceptible nod was his only reaction. But for Hyejin, it was enough. It was confirmation that she had not only passed the test, but redefined the terms. Adrenaline still pulsed in her veins, but a deep calm began to settle. She had succeeded, not just cooked a dish, but told her story, infused her soul into every fiber of the meat, into every drop of the sauce. She thought of Mireille, of her daughter's smile, of the promise of a future that now seemed more tangible than ever. The humiliation of that day on the street, the feeling of powerlessness, all of it had been transformed into a driving force, a fire that propelled her to go beyond. She was no longer just the street cook. She was Hyejin, a chef with a voice, a vision. As the kitchen began to calm after the frenzy of service, a tall, elegant figure approached her station. It was Lee Sang-wook. His eyes, which Hyejin had first seen filled with compassion and curiosity, now shone with contained satisfaction. "Miss Hyejin," he said, his voice calm but laden with authority, "Monsieur Dubois is not easily impressed. He is a critic who seeks the soul in food, and you delivered exactly that." Hyejin bowed slightly. "Thank you, CEO Lee. It was an honor." "The honor was ours," he corrected, a slight smile playing on his lips. "You didn't just meet expectations, you surpassed them. That's sauce. It's a bridge between tradition and innovation, between the humble and the sublime. It's exactly the kind of cuisine I want the Imperial to represent." Those words were a balm to her soul, a validation that went beyond the critics' applause. It was the recognition from the man who had seen something in her when no one else did. "However," Lee Sang-wook continued, and Hyejin felt the tension return, "the journey to become the executive chef of a chain like ours is more than a single gala dinner. It's about consistency, leadership, and the ability to continuously innovate while maintaining the essence that makes you unique." He paused, his eyes fixed on hers. "Today's success was a big step, but it's not the final destination. We have one last challenge for you, Ms. Hyejin. A challenge that will define if you have what it takes to lead the Imperial's cuisine. Hyejin swallowed hard. The euphoria dissipated, replaced by a new wave of anxiety and determination. She knew it wouldn't be easy. Nothing in her life ever had been. "What is the challenge, CEO Lee?" she asked, her voice firm despite her racing heart. Lee Sang-wook gestured to Chef Kang, who approached. "Chef Kang will explain the details, but in summary, we want you to create a complete menu for our new flagship restaurant, The Essence, which will open in 3 months. Not just one dish, but a culinary experience from start to finish. And the theme is Roots and Reimagination." "Roots and Reimagination," Hyejin repeated, her mind already swirling with ideas and concerns. It was a blank canvas, but also an abyss. Chef Kang, in his monotone voice, added, "You will have complete creative freedom, Ms. Hyejin, but the menu must reflect the philosophy you demonstrated tonight. The ability to take the soul of traditional Korean cuisine and elevate it to a level of international haute gastronomy. You will have a team at your disposal and a generous budget. But the pressure will be immense. The success of The Essence will depend entirely on your vision." The magnitude of the task hit her like a wave. An entire restaurant, a complete concept. It was every chef's dream, but also their nightmare. What if she failed? What if she couldn't replicate the magic of the jjigae sauce in an entire menu? Furthermore, Lee Sang-wook intervened again. The launch of The Essence will coincide with a high-profile charity event where guests will include some of the city's most influential names. And yes, Ms. Kim, the customer who humiliated you on the street, will be one of the guests of honor. The name hit her like an electric shock. Ms. Kim, the woman who trampled on her food, who made her feel so small and insignificant. Her face, once a painful memory, now transformed into a target, an even more powerful motivation. This was not just a culinary challenge, it was a chance for complete redemption, to show everyone, and especially her, the invaluable worth of her art. The tension in the air was palpable. Hyejin felt a mix of dread and cold fury. She had overcome the critic, but now she would face the ghost of her past, personified in a woman who represented everything she fought to leave behind. "You have 3 months, Ms. Hyejin," Chef Kang concluded, his eyes assessing. 3 months to prove that you are not just a talented chef, but a visionary leader. 3 months to build a legacy. Hyejin nodded, her jaw clenched. She wasn't just cooking for herself or for Mireille now. She was cooking for every street cook, for every person who had ever been underestimated. She was cooking to prove that the true essence of cuisine wasn't in the price of ingredients or the gleam of cutlery, but in the passion, the soul, and the story told in every dish. The game had changed. The stakes were higher than ever, and Hyejin was ready to play. Those last words echoed in Hyejin's mind like a mantra, a prophecy, and a challenge. 3 months to build a legacy. The game had changed and she was ready to play, but readiness was only the starting point. The magnitude of the task, the responsibility of an entire restaurant, of a complete culinary vision, weighed on her shoulders as never before, and, permeating everything, the shadow of Ms. Kim, a living memory of the humiliation that propelled her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of ideas and anxiety. The concept of roots and reimagination was at once liberating and daunting. How to translate the soul of her street food, the essence of the most authentic Korean cuisine, for the sophisticated palate and high expectations of the Imperial. It wasn't just about technique, but about narrative. Each dish needed to tell a story, Hyejin's story, Korea's story, the story of a journey. She began immersed in notebooks, sketching ingredients, combinations, textures. She visited traditional markets, spoke with farmers, rediscovered forgotten flavors and ancestral techniques. The Imperial's experimental kitchen became her sanctuary and her battlefield. Hours turned into days, and days into weeks. She tested, failed, adjusted, started over. The smell of fresh herbs, the bubbling of complex broths, the sizzle of meats on the griddle, all were part of her creative symphony. The team assigned to her was a mix of young talents and skeptical veterans. At first, there was a distance, a veiled curiosity about the street cook who had won over CEO Li and Monsieur Dubois. But Hye-jin was not easily intimidated. She worked side by side with them, teaching, learning, sharing her passion. She showed them how a simple banchan could be elevated to a work of art, how kimchi could have layers of complexity that rivaled the finest wines. Slowly, skepticism gave way to respect, and respect to admiration. They began to understand that she wasn't just cooking, she was infusing life into every ingredient. Mireille was her anchor. In rare moments of downtime, her daughter's smile was the most powerful reminder of why she was doing all this. Every dish, every sacrifice was to build a future for them, a future where the dignity and value of her work would be unquestionable. The image of Ms. Kim, though painful, also served as a silent fuel. It wasn't revenge, but a deep need to prove, not just to her, but to herself, that true art cannot be trampled upon. The menu began to take shape, an amuse-bouche that was a playful reinterpretation of a street snack. Starters that explored the delicacy of fermented vegetables and the freshness of Korean seafood. Main courses that elevated traditional meats and grains to a level of haute cuisine with sauces that were the soul of her grandmother's cooking, but with a modern sophistication, and a dessert that was a tribute to the sweetness of childhood with a touch of gochujang for an unexpected contrast. Each item was a bridge between past and future, between the familiar and the extraordinary. Chef Kang observed from afar, his penetrating eyes evaluating Hye-jin's every move, every decision. He offered no praise, but he also offered no criticism. His silence was, in some way, more significant than any words. It was a tacit acknowledgement that Hye-jin was forging her own path, redefining what it meant to be a chef at the Imperial. The weeks flew by, and the pressure increased exponentially. The final menu tests were exhaustive, each dish dissected, each flavor adjusted to perfection. The stress was immense, but the adrenaline kept her going. She knew that the launch of the Essence was not just the opening of a restaurant. It was the stage where she would present her soul to the world. 1 week remained until the big charity event. Invitations had been sent. The guest list was a who's who of society. And yes, Ms. Kim's name was there, prominently displayed. The news reached Hye-jin like a chilling reminder, but this time there was no dread. There was a resolute calm. She had transformed pain into art, humiliation into inspiration. That night, as she reviewed the menu for the 100th time, Hye-jin felt a strange sense of peace. Fear was still there, a persistent whisper, but it was muffled by the certainty that she had given her all. Every dish on the Essence menu was a part of her, a declaration of her identity. It wasn't about proving she was good enough. It was about showing that she was, and always had been, extraordinary. The stage was set, the lights were about to come on, and Hye-jin was ready for the world to taste the essence of her soul. The last week before the opening of The Essence was a blur of adrenaline and exhaustion. Days merged into nights in the experimental kitchen, where the air vibrated with the scent of exotic spices, the clinking of pans, and the concentrated whispers of the team. Every dish on the Roots and Reimagination menu was dissected, tasted, and adjusted hundreds of times. Hye-jin was a maestro, her movements precise, her vision unshakable. She wasn't just cooking, she was sculpting an experience, polishing every detail until it shone with the perfection she had imagined. The tension was palpable, but different from the paralyzing anxiety of the past. It was a creative tension, the energy of an artist about to unveil her masterpiece. Chef Kang, though still reserved, watched with an intensity that Hyejin now interpreted as respect. He needed no words. His silence was the most valuable approval. The team, once skeptical, now moved in unison with her, an extension of her will, sharing the same fervor. They had seen her passion, tasted the soul in her food, and now were an integral part of that legacy under construction. The night arrived. The dining hall of the Essence was a spectacle of discreet elegance. Soft lights highlighted the dark wood and minimalist floral arrangements, creating an atmosphere that was both sophisticated and welcoming. The kitchen, however, was a cauldron of controlled activity. Hyejin, wearing her immaculate chef's uniform, felt her heart pound, but her hands were steady. She took one last look at the printed menu, a journey through Korean roots reimagined. Every word, every dish was a piece of her story. The first guests began to arrive, their muffled voices echoing from the dining hall. The guest list was, indeed, a parade of the city's elite, politicians, business leaders, artists, all there to witness what the Imperial had prepared. And somewhere among them would be Ms. Kim. Hyejin took a deep breath. Her image no longer provoked the same dread. There was a strange calm, a certainty that her food would speak for itself. Service began. The amuse-bouche, a miniature purple rice tteokbokki with gochujang caviar and smoked cheese foam, was the first to be sent out. It was a provocation, a playful nod to street cuisine, elevated to a level of art. Comments began to reach the kitchen. Innovative, delicious, an unexpected surprise. The buzz of satisfaction was music to Hyejin's ears. Next, the appetizers. A fresh scallop-o with white kimchi sauce and yuzu gel, and a wild mushroom mandu with smoked doenjang broth. Each dish was a symphony of flavors and textures, a dance between the familiar and the new. Hyejin watched the dishes leave, each a carefully painted canvas, reflecting the essence of her roots and the audacity of her reimagination. It was then that she saw her. Through the small opening that led to the dining hall, as a waiter carried a main course to the VIP table, Hyejin spotted Ms. Kim. She was seated at the most prominent table, surrounded by influential figures, her posture haughty and her expression unreadable. For a brief moment, time seemed to stop. The memory of the humiliation, of the trampled food, of the shame flashed in her mind. But there was no pain, only a cold determination. That moment was not about revenge, but about validation. Hyejin focused. The main courses were the soul of the menu. A wagyu galbi with purple sweet potato puree and a caramelized jangaji sauce, and a black rice bibimbap with organic vegetables and a perfect quail egg, served with a secret sauce that was the fusion of her childhood memories and her refined technique. She imagined Ms. Kim tasting each of these dishes. She imagined the surprise, perhaps the recognition, perhaps even a flicker of regret. The feedback continued to be overwhelmingly positive. Guests were delighted, their conversations filled with praise and admiration. Lee Sang-wook, who passed through the kitchen with a discreet smile, made brief eye contact with Hyejin, a silent nod of approval worth more than 1,000 words. Lai, the dessert, a green tea bingsu with black sesame ice cream and rice crisp, finished with a drizzle of gochujang caramel for an audacious contrast. It was the sweetness of childhood, the complexity of maturity, and the daring of a chef unafraid to challenge expectations. As the guests savored dessert, Hyejin allowed herself a moment to absorb everything. The kitchen was still in motion, but the peak pressure had passed. She had done it. She had transformed her story into a menu, her pain into art, her passion into a legacy. Later, as most of the guests began to disperse, one of the waiters approached Hyejin. "Chef, Ms. Kim asked to speak with you." Hyejin's heart leaped. This was the moment. She nodded, washed her hands, and walked towards the dining hall, her posture erect, her gaze steady. Ms. Kim was alone at her table, looking at the almost untouched dessert plate. Her eyes lifted as Hyejin approached. There was none of the arrogance from before, just a complex expression Hyejin couldn't quite decipher. "Ms. Hyejin," Ms. Kim began, her voice softer than Hyejin remembered. I didn't know it was you." She gestured to the plate. "This food, it's extraordinary. I've never tasted anything like it." There was a pause, a heavy silence. I'm so sorry for what happened on the street. I was unforgivable." Hyejin looked her in the eyes. There was no triumph in her gaze, only a calm dignity. "Food has a way of reminding us where we came from, Ms. Kim, and of showing us where we can go." She didn't need apologies. Her art, her journey had already spoken for themselves. The humiliation had been the catalyst, but passion was the engine. Ms. Kim nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on Hyejin's. There seemed to be a weight in her words, a genuine recognition. "You've built something truly special here, Ms. Hyejin, something that transcends cuisine." Hyejin merely smiled, a small, confident smile. She had proven her worth, not just to Ms. Kim, but to herself, to Mireille, to the world. The legacy had begun, and this was just the first chapter. She had transformed humiliation into a bridge, and now she was ready to cross it, taking her essence to even greater heights. The game had been played, and Hyejin had won, not with revenge, but with the pure and undeniable strength of her talent and her soul. The night unfolded in an almost reverent silence in the Essence kitchen. The buzz from the dining hall had subsided. The last guests were departing, and the frantic pace of production gave way to the calm of cleanup. Hyejin remained there, watching the last dishes being washed, the lingering aroma of spices and success still hanging in the air. The conversation with Ms. Kim echoed in her mind, not as a resounding victory, but as the closing of a cycle. It wasn't the apology that mattered, but the recognition. The recognition that her art, born of adversity, had transcended humiliation and spoken for itself. That night, Hyejin felt no euphoria, but a deep sense of peace. The fear that had haunted her for so long had finally dissipated, replaced by an unshakable certainty. She had found herself in the kitchen, not just as a chef, but as an artist, a storyteller through flavors. Her soul was there, in every dish, in every detail of the essence. The following days were a whirlwind. Reviews began to pour in, and they were unanimous. The Essence was not just a restaurant, it was a culinary revolution. Newspapers and specialized magazines acclaimed Hyejin as the new star of Korean gastronomy, praising her audacity, her impeccable technique, and above all, the soul she infused into every creation. Reservations soared, and within weeks, the restaurant was fully booked for months to come. Hyejin's life had changed drastically. The exhaustive routine of the street stall, the constant financial worries, all of it was a distant memory. Now she led a talented team, had access to the best ingredients, and the creative freedom to explore every facet of her vision. But despite all the luxury and recognition, she never forgot her roots. Every dish was still a tribute to her grandmother, to her childhood, to the resilience that had brought her there. Mireille, her daughter, was the greatest beneficiary of this new phase. The girl now had a stable life, attended a good school, and saw her mother happy and fulfilled. Mireille's eyes shone with pride whenever she saw her mother on television or read about her in newspapers. "Mommy, you're the best chef in the world," she would say. And for Hyejin, that was the greatest reward. Lee Sang-wook, the CEO who had bet on her, was visibly satisfied. In a private meeting, he expressed his admiration. "Hyejin, You didn't just exceed my expectations, you redefined them. The essence is just the beginning. I have ambitious plans for the Imperial's culinary expansion, and I want you to be the driving force behind it all. He spoke of new restaurants, innovative concepts, of taking the essence of Korean cuisine to the world, with Hye-jin at the helm. The proposal was clear. She was not just an executive chef, she was now the architect of the Imperial Group's gastronomic future. Chef Kang, the silent mentor, finally broke his silence. One afternoon, as Hye-jin reviewed the menu for the next season, he approached. "Hye-jin," his voice was hoarse, but laden with contained emotion. "You found your own way, your food. It has a story. That's what makes it extraordinary." He paused, his penetrating eyes softening. "I have nothing left to teach you. Now, you are the one who teaches." It was the greatest compliment she could have received, the final validation from her mentor. The pressure, of course, continued, but now it was a different kind of pressure, to maintain excellence, to constantly innovate, to honor the trust placed in her. Hye-jin embraced this challenge with the same passion that had driven her from the beginning. She knew that success was not a destination, but a continuous journey, a relentless pursuit of perfection and the authentic expression of her art. The essence became a landmark, a must-visit destination for gastronomy lovers worldwide, and Hye-jin, the street cook whose food was once trampled, rose to become one of the most respected and influential chefs of her generation. Her story was a testament to human resilience, to the ability to transform pain into purpose, humiliation into inspiration. Every dish that left her kitchen was more than food. It was a bridge between past and future, between tradition and innovation, between the familiar and the sublime. It was the essence of her soul, served with dignity and undeniable talent. The journey had been long and arduous, but Hye-jin had proven that with passion, courage, and truth in her heart, any obstacle could be overcome. The game was not just won, it had been redefined. And for Hye-jin, this was just the beginning of a legacy that would continue to nourish souls and inspire generations.